Welcome to episode 4 of Spill the Tearal, a JRPG podcast where I talk about JRPG news, trailers, upcoming games, casual top list, what I'm playing, and more. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about some cool stuff. We're going to be talking a bit about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We're going to be talking about some other Final Fantasy games that I've been playing, and so on. So first, let's go into some housekeeping like I always do. This time, I don't really have too much housekeeping. I don't think I need to bring up anything other than, I feel like I brought this up last week too, but Final Fantasy VII Remake, the Let's Play, that's still a thing. I just need time to play it. I don't have that much time to actually block out about like 2 hours to record it, so that's why there hasn't been an episode in like a week or something. And so that is still happening. Funnily enough, I thought about it, but I'm pretty sure if I wasn't doing the Let's Play, I'd be long done the game by now, and I'll talk about why more in the what I'm playing section. But yeah, that Let's Play is still happening. I do want it to be completed. If I didn't already say that I want to complete it, I might have like stopped doing it, but I've said it, so I do really want to try completing it and letting it go to the end to see how it does. So that is something that is happening. And yeah, I honestly don't have anything else to mention in the housekeeping section. So we're just going to go straight into the first section of the podcast, which is the what I'm playing section. So what games or game have I been playing for the last week? And there's actually 2 games, and they're both Final Fantasy games. So we're going to start with Final Fantasy IV first. And I mentioned this last week where I said that I was very close to finishing Final Fantasy IV, and I talked about my thoughts from the beginning of the game to the part where I was at and what I thought about it. And I also mentioned that I'd probably be done by the next time I recorded an episode, and that was true. I finished maybe 2 days after I recorded Spill the Tearal episode 3. Now, what do I think about the game? Honestly, there isn't too much for me to add on to the game because what I talked about previously about Final Fantasy IV was pretty much my thoughts about the combat, the story, the characters, the plot. And since then, all I did was really finish the game. There was maybe there was more than I thought. I thought there would be maybe 2 more hours of gameplay. There's probably 5 or 6 more hours. And so I'll talk about the ending in a vague way. I won't spoil anything. But yeah, there won't be too much more to talk about. So something I do want to mention, I'll start with the negative first and then end with the positives. But there is a small negative. And I think the only main negative for me in terms of Final Fantasy IV was that it is an old game. And so there was some old game tendencies. And the one that I'm talking about mostly is grinding. Now, I mentioned last time, I'm pretty sure I mentioned last time, is there is a mode where you can turn on times for experience and times for gil. I turned that on, and I pretty much had times for experience on for the second half of the game. What's kind of annoying is even with that on, I still had to grind a lot before the final boss. So I tried doing the final few enemies / boss, and I wasn't able to beat them. And so I literally had to grind for maybe 2-3 hours with the times for XP on. I was just mindlessly grinding while listening to a podcast, and then after that I was able to beat the final boss. And what's more annoying is, again, not going to spoilers, before you could actually fight the final boss / final enemies, you have to go through this long ass cutscene which you can't really skip. And it's not even a cutscene, you actually have to keep pressing X. So that was very annoying to do every time, and because of that, I kind of didn't even want to attempt the boss that much. So whenever I lost, instead of wanting to go through that again, I just set another hour to grind, come back and try the boss again. So that's how I was doing it. So that's the only negative aspect of the game. That's kind of how it has to be, because it is an old game, and the games at the time kind of decided to pad the games out with grinding, so I can't really blame it too much for that. But that was really the only negative with the game. Other than that, I thought the story was very good. I thought it was incredible for especially being an older game. I'm pretty sure I mentioned previously where I had no idea how I would like the story, because this is technically the oldest game I would be playing for the story, because usually when I think of old games that I played on the PSP or the PS2, I wasn't playing for the story at the time. It was mainly for the fun. But these days, whenever I play a game, it is for the story. Obviously, I want it to be good gameplay, but I am primarily playing for the story and the plot. And Final Fantasy IV, I think, delivers. It is pretty simple. They don't go into too much detail or too much character specifics, but again, it is a thing of the time. And in terms of looking past that and just thinking of it as an overall story, I think it did a good job, and I think the characters were cool. And at the end, again, no spoilers, there were kind of cool things where they kind of showed a character doing something, and it seemed like they were going to go on their own journey this way, and other characters doing other things, where it almost seems like they could have had a sequel or had it connect to other Final Fantasy games. But I thought that was a cool thing that they did at the end. Another thing I want to mention, and I didn't really mention this last time because there wasn't any of this, I think, in the first half of the game, but I did a lot of side content stuff. Now, what's surprising to me about that is I didn't know there was side content in the game. So pretty much when I was playing Final Fantasy IV, I was just going through the story because I was pretty sure that's the only thing you can do. I didn't ever sense that I can do side content. Now, at a certain point, like the map opens up where you're able to more easily travel to different towns. That's when I did go to other towns, and when I did that, it didn't feel like side content. It was just that I was going to towns earlier than I was supposed to. So again, that wasn't really side content. But before finishing the game, I realized there were certain caves in the game where I was going into, and they seemed very weird, where like I don't know if there's enough time in the story for me to go to these caves. So I decided to just go into the caves and check them out, and turns out, yeah, they were side content. Now I'll talk a bit about the specifics of the cave, so if you don't want to hear this, kind of like fast forward a couple of minutes, but I won't be going into like any real spoilers. But pretty much what the caves are, if you continue these cave/dungeons, you pretty much get extra summons for your summoner character. And that's all it was. So by doing these extra dungeons, I was able to get more powerful summons for my summoner character, and it's pretty cool to see. So there's like some summons that help you with healing, some summons that are better for offensive uses, and things like that. And I thought that was pretty cool because I didn't expect there to be side content, and it wasn't even like framed as side content. I honestly didn't know it was side content until I was done the game, because why would I know? It seems like maybe this was something that you had to do at some point, but I didn't know. I just went to the dungeons, I kind of cleared them out, and I talked to certain NPCs and got these extra summons. So I actually kind of enjoyed that, and again, it did really pad out the game, but in a nice way. So like I mentioned, after the previous time where I talked about Final Fantasy IV, I played about 6 hours. If I had to talk about the story aspect, the story was probably an extra hour at most. The other 5 hours was the grinding and the side content. So I think the side content did a good job. The grinding did not do a good job of padding the game, but I just kind of want to give my flowers to the side content because I really appreciated that not only was the side stuff, but it was actually kind of cool because it's not like I just did like a side quest where I had to like, I don't know, gather like 10 wheat for someone and they just give me like 100 gil, but I actually got summons and very powerful summons for my summoning character, and I was actually using one of them a lot in the final battle, so I thought that was pretty cool. And other than that, the last thing I want to mention about Final Fantasy IV, not even Final Fantasy IV, but kind of Final Fantasy in general, is I finished the game. Something happened. I won't go into details, but something happened with the moon in Final Fantasy, and I was kind of interested in what would happen because I played Final Fantasy 16. I noticed there was something happening with the moons in that game, and I noticed in this game there's something happening with the moons. So after I finished Final Fantasy IV, I went to Google and I kind of Googled what the timelines were because I've played a decent amount of Final Fantasy games now, and I always notice like things connecting where they would mention something in one Final Fantasy game that exists in another game, and they all have the same gods, and the moons were something I noticed in multiple games. So I googled what the official timeline was for Final Fantasy, and I was surprised to see that there is none. Apparently it's very well known that Final Fantasy is just an anthology series where like each game is, you can think of its own dimension, and I'm like, I get it, but to me, this may be like something. This may sound stupid coming from someone who isn't that deep into the Final Fantasy series, but to me, it honestly seems more of like Square Enix doesn't just want to put the time into making an official timeline, which I get, because if there was an official timeline, they'd probably have to, with every game, check that there's no continuity error. So that's kind of how I'm taking it. So in my headcanon, I think the games do take place in some sort of combined universe / dimension or something, but there just isn't an official way to connect them because there's just too much things that are similar, like not even just the gods, but the thing with the two moons. There are things in Final Fantasy 16 where they mention terms where I heard in Final Fantasy 15. I haven't played Final Fantasy 10, but I think in that game people said like you hear they mention Shinra, which is in Final Fantasy 7. So like I think there's enough things mentioned between the games where like they are connected in certain ways. Obviously they could just be Easter eggs, but in my headcanon I'm going to choose to believe that they are connected because that makes me want to play the games more. When games are connected like that, it's a lot more cool. I kind of think of it like the E-series. The E-series you can play in any order. They're just individual adventures of this one character, but they do take place they all take place in the same universe. It's like the same guy doing the adventures, just in different order. So I'm gonna kind of take it like that, where like all these things did take place at some point. They could be 1,000 years apart, I have no idea, but it's just cooler and more fantastical to me to imagine that they are combined, and I kind of want to think about how these different games connect. But that's the last thing I want to mention, because Final Fantasy IV really got me into that lore mood for Final Fantasy, and I was slightly disappointed to find out where I went on Reddit and there's some guy asking like what the official timeline was, and literally every single comment was like talking shit about him because they were saying like, it's not connected, bro, it's just an anthology series, you're stupid for thinking it's connected. Where I'm like, okay, damn, they kind of clowned on him, so I don't want to say anything, but my headcanon is they are connected. But that's all I'll say about that. And in terms of the what I'm playing section, one more game that I want to mention that I started playing a couple of days ago is Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion. I finally got that, and I've started it in the path to getting Final Fantasy VII Rebirth when that comes out. I think I mentioned this in my Final Fantasy VII Remake Let's Play, or I mentioned it on this podcast, but I am not going to be playing Rebirth on launch at all. That's just not possible because I want to finish 7 Remake, I want to finish the Intergrade or Intermission DLC, and I want to finish Crisis Core before going into 7 Rebirth, especially because I played Crisis Core when it came out on the PSP when I was a kid. I played 7 Remake like 4 years ago whenever it came out, and both of those games I played when I wasn't a Final Fantasy fan, so like I didn't really know anything about the lore. I didn't really care much for it. Now that I'm a lot more interested in the actual story. So even when I'm playing 7 Remake on my Let's Play, you'll notice me picking things up which I didn't really know the first time. Hell, I'm playing Crisis Core right now, and they're mentioning stuff where I'm like, I feel like something about that was mentioned in 7 Remake, and I'm kind of connecting the dots in my head. And so like already I'm so much more interested in the Final Fantasy series because of this. And so when I go into Rebirth, I think I'm going to be fully ready for what that game has to offer, and I can't wait, honestly. And so with Crisis Core specifically, I'm about 5-6 hours in, and I thought that was funny because I literally got Crisis Core like 2 days ago, and I played it for 2 days, and I'm already 6 hours in. And the reason that's funny is because my 7 Remake Let's Play I started like 3 weeks ago, and that I'm probably only like 4 or 5 hours in. And so that's why I mentioned beforehand that if I was not doing the Let's Play for 7 Remake, I'd 100% be done by now, because I would just be able to play here and there on my portal during my morning walks, during my evening after work or whatever. I'd play on it. But because I'm doing a Let's Play, I literally have to set aside 2 hours at least of like straight gaming time, which I just don't have time for these days. So I'll finish that when I can, then I'll do the DLC. Because 7 Remake is taking a long time, I don't know if I'll Let's Play the DLC. I might just do that on my own just so I can get that over with. And I'm going to do Crisis Core on my own time, obviously. And then once I'm done with those, then I will play Rebirth. And I'll probably just be talking about those games on this podcast. I don't think I'm going to be doing Let's Plays of either of those because don't have the recording time. Editing them takes a little longer than I expected. And so that's how I'm going to cover it. But okay, getting more to Crisis Core. Yeah, like I mentioned, I'm really liking the connections I'm noticing between that and Final Fantasy VII. They're mentioning certain races, which I heard in Final Fantasy VII Remake. They're mentioning, in Crisis Core, they've mentioned Avalanche. An NPC has mentioned Avalanche, which I thought was really interesting, which is obviously the group that Cloud kind of helps out in Final Fantasy VII. And again, I'm only 5 hours in, not too much, but one thing I am noticing is that I'm not sure how different the combat is from the original one on PSP. I think it is different. Like, it's not the same combat style, but I'm liking it a lot because it's pretty much the Final Fantasy 16 style, but like with more of the classic Final Fantasy flair with, you know, using the spells like Thunder, Blizzard, Fire, or Blizzard Blade, or whatever they have in Final Fantasy Crisis Core, but they're using the system where you kind of get to hold a trigger down and use the face buttons to use the magic. I've always loved that. That was usually my favorite part in Kingdom Hearts, so I'm really glad they're doing it with that. So combat in Final Fantasy Crisis Core, I think, is great. Story so far, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it a lot because I straight up don't remember a fuck about the story. Again, I played this on PSP. I don't even know what year it came out. It was probably when I was in middle school, maybe even earlier. I'm not sure. And I'm 25 now, so it's been a long time since then. And so I'm going through it. I remember like certain fights. I remember certain story beats, but I don't remember any of the in between at all. I don't remember how you get to the certain story beats. So far in the 5 hours I've played, everything pretty much has seemed new except for like 1 or 2 things, and so I'm really enjoying that. I'm also like exploring it more because when I play JRPGs in my own time, I like doing every single thing. So far I haven't been doing all the missions, which are kind of like the side quests of this game where you can go to the save point, do a mission to get items. I've done some here and there just to get some summons, or when I'm bored and I kind of want to listen to a podcasting game, I'll do those. So I don't know if I'll do all of those, but I think that's a really fun thing to do when I kind of want to do side missions. But what I have been doing in Crisis Core is, between like actual story missions, you can kind of just explore the city. I have been doing that. I have been going to the city, talking to every single NPC. Whenever they have like an orange indication on them, they kind of give you something, whether it be like a mini side quest or like you'll get a mail from them, because there's a lot of fan clubs in the game where you can learn stuff about Angion Genesis. And that's something I actually think is important, because early in the game you kind of know Angion Genesis, but not really. And then fast forward a bit, like I know like they're not going to be in the game too heavily in terms of like getting to know them, so it's funny that I'm learning about them mainly through the fan club, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so almost everything I know about Andrew right now is through the fan club newsletters that I get about him, and I'm sure the same will be for Genesis as I kind of go through the game. I don't know if the newsletters will continue throughout the entire game, maybe they'll stop very soon, but that is something that I'm enjoying, and it's kind of an interesting way to send story my way, and something that I don't completely dislike. So that is one of the things I'm doing. I've met Aerith in the game. That has happened, and there's not really that much more. I just really want to mention that I'm playing the game. I'm enjoying the combat. I'm enjoying the story, and so far there isn't really too much negative about it. It doesn't feel grindy at all. The leveling system is interesting, where like you don't have XP points to level up. It's just kind of randomish, where like if you're, I forgot what the system is called, where like you have like a slot machine constantly going up in the top left corner. If it hits 777, I think you level up, and that's how it works. And so that's kind of random, but I have been leveling up fine. I've leveled up like 3 or 4 times so far. So yeah, that is another thing that I'm enjoying. I'll probably talk about that slot machine system more if I in a future podcast episode as I continue playing it. But so far, even that I think is kind of cool. I'm never paying attention to it. I just fight, and if I get any cool status boost from that, that's cool. I don't think I ever like look up at it. I'm like, oh please, can I get a 777 and get a certain status effect? That's never happening, but it is a cool system which I don't really see many games do. But yeah, those are the games I've been playing: Crisis Core and Final Fantasy IV. Now the next segment of this podcast is a JRPG that I'm looking forward to. Now I want to be honest, I kind of had a hard time thinking of this because I usually don't like look forward to many games. Usually when there are games, they're like the big ones like 7 Rebirth, and I've already talked about that in a previous episode. So I kind of tried thinking about games that I'm kind of interested in, and then I saw this on my YouTube recommended, and I'm like, perfect. And this is one game that I saw a while ago, and it looked interesting, and that's a game called Project Mugen. Now if you don't know what this game is, this is kind of like an anime JRPG game, but one of the reasons it's been getting so much interest from people is because they straight up stole the web swinging mechanic from Spider-Man, and you can tell it's like the exact same animations of swinging, of flipping in the air, of running on the walls. And the thing is, I'm completely fine with it. That's perfect. Like, stealing I think is fine as long as you add more to it, like you're doing more with the game. And if you look at the trailer of the game, you can tell that it's not a Spider-Man game at all. They just took the swinging mechanics. And also, you should want to take things from games that are good. That's how gaming works. If a game does something really well, other developers are going to take that mechanic and make it their own. That's how things evolve. Not everything needs to be a pure innovation. And so I was actually kind of wondering why no other game was doing this swinging mechanic. I was just assuming that maybe it's a bit too hard for any other developer to do, but clearly this developer is doing it, and it looks really cool. I want another game where I get to swing around, because Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2's traversal is probably the best traversal I've ever experienced in gaming. And I kind of hope someone also steals the web wing mechanics from Spider-Man 2 too, because that was done phenomenally. So yeah, they have this mechanic where you get to swing around. In this game, you're using grappling hooks. You're not using webs, obviously. It's an anime aesthetic. And something that I noticed about the game, which is really cool, is that the combat looks very, very varied. So like in the trailer that I saw, there's like different combat styles. There's one person that it straight up looks like you're playing a third-person shooter. They're just shooting enemies. There's another one that uses yo-yos that kind of turn into like these shurikens as he's fighting. There's another one that uses the big hammer. There's other ones that are kind of more close combat oriented, and they all look good, which is interesting. It's not like any of them look like kind of shitty, but the thing is, I obviously don't know how in-depth they are, because the trailer kind of cross-cuts between them really quickly. So for all I know, each of the combat systems are very surface level, but from what I saw from the trailer, it looks interesting enough. And funnily enough, I thought this game was made by HoYoverse, which is a company that makes Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail. They're making ZZZ right now. So I thought this was just another game they were working on, and I always assumed Project Mugen was a game, but it isn't. It's being worked on by another developer. So that is something interesting, because I thought it would be HoYoverse, because I don't play many HoYoverse games, and I used to play them, but one thing I do like about the games is they always feel like completely polished and have like a certain standard that they try to reach, which I really appreciate. So now that I know that they're not HoYoverse, I am a bit more skeptical, but again, from what I saw in the trailers, the game does look good, so I am still looking forward to it. And another thing that I want to mention about the game before I move on is the characters and the world seem very interesting. So the world it looks like a modern day city, which is cool. I think I mentioned in a previous episode, I prefer games that take place in towns or cities rather than areas like forests or islands. I kind of like the more urban take on games. And so this looks like it's taking like place in, I don't know, like it looks like a modern day, whatever, China, Japan, I can't really tell. And so that's pretty interesting. And also it gives off heavy like anime, almost slice of life vibes. Like when I see these characters kind of interacting and talking and just chilling, like this seems like a cast of characters that I want to be with. Like I don't know if anyone else has had this feeling, but when you're into like a really good anime or a manga and you finish, you kind of wish you could kind of go back into the world and be with those characters again. And so I don't get that with games too much. The one that would probably be the most like that is the Trails series, where like I really like those cast of characters and I wish, you know, I could hang out with them more by playing their games. So with this game, when I'm seeing these characters, like I can easily see myself like really getting into the game where like these cast of characters becomes really important to me, and I really just want to go into the game again just to see more of these characters and learn about them and just like hang out with them by playing the game. So that's something that's really interesting to me. So far this game is looking good. As long as they kind of have a good plot too. I don't know how that will be. It does look like a very anime-esque plot. They show kind of like this villain like floating in the sky and shit. So it looks very anime-like in terms of that. So as long as there's something to chew on in terms of the plot, I think characters, it looks good so far. The combat looks good so far. The aesthetic looks good so far. Everything about this game I'm pretty interested in. So hopefully Project Mugen comes out at some point. I don't think they have a release date right now, but yeah, I'm gonna keep my eye out for that. And finishing that segment, we are going to move on to some JRPG news / announcements / trailers that came out in the last week that I'm kind of interested in. And there's a couple of things here. Let me get one of them out of the way really quick, and that is a demo that released. It is a demo for the game Unicorn Overlord. That is a JRPG I've seen some people talking about. It is not a game that I'm personally interested in because this just isn't the type of game I play, but it is something that does look good. So if you are interested in playing it, there is a demo out for it now. It's kind of like this. It looks like a 2D tactical JRPG. The art style is pretty cool. Everything looks like hand painted. I'm not sure if it is. So like the visual style is very cool. But yeah, if you're into JRPGs that are more tactical based, you can check that out. I noticed the demo is on Switch. It's on PlayStation. I'm not sure if it's on Xbox. I tried Googling about it. Oh, yep, right here. It is on Xbox too. So yeah, it seems like the demo is on pretty much everything. So if you want to check the game out, I recommend you do, because the game does look cool. It's just personally not for me. So that's one of the things I want to get out of the way. The first thing I want to talk about in the JRPG news section, other than that, is a game called Reinatus. Now, Reinatus is a game that was, I believe it was announced like a few days ago. Yeah, 2 days ago, there's a trailer that they announced, and this looks really cool, this game. It's very anime. The art style looks hella cool, and again, like Project Mugen, it looks like it takes place in a modern city. The plot looks interesting. Something I noticed right away is that the main character's design looks very Kingdom Hearts, which you don't really see often. You really don't see other games taking the Kingdom Hearts design style, but he looks very much like Kingdom Hearts 3 design aesthetic, which is cool. You clearly have some plot going on in the trailer with like between different factions. The combat looks pretty interesting, and so I think this game looks pretty cool. It's definitely on my list, and I saw that it's being published by NIS America. Their games usually are more interesting to me. So yeah, Reinatus looks pretty cool. The aesthetic, it's more dark than I usually am into, but again, it looks pretty cool. I want to see more of it because the performance of the game didn't look the best. Like the frame rates were kind of dropping here and there. So we'll see. It looks kind of like a Scarlet Nexus tier game, if you know about that game. So yeah, that is a game that was announced and one that I am looking forward to coming out soon. Other than that, the main thing I want to talk about in this JRPG news section is Pokemon Day happened. It happened yesterday from when I'm recording this. I'm recording this on February 28th. And in that, I didn't watch it. I just looked at the news that came out after. And really the only thing that really interested me was Pokemon Legends ZA that came out of that. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's Z-A. I don't know if it's pronounced ZA. In my head, I've been calling it Pokemon Legends Z2A. But the trailer for that came out. I'll be honest, the trailer I think was not good. Like they didn't really show anything. They could have just announced like the logo and explained in an article what it was about, and I think it would have like had the same effect. But pretty much the trailer is kind of showing a holographic view of like Lumio City, which this game is taking place in, and that's pretty much it. Now, a few things to talk about in terms of Pokemon Legends Z2A is, first of all, it takes place in Lumio City. I remember that was a city that took place in a previous game. I googled it. It looks like Pokemon X and Y is a game that took place in the city. But something that I found very interesting about this is, at least from the tweets I saw from Pokemon, is they specifically say Pokemon Legends Z2A entirely takes place within Lumio City. Entirely. I don't think, has a Pokemon game done that in the past where like they entirely take place within one city? So that's something that's very interesting to me because I prefer JRPGs that do that. A JRPG I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, or last episode, was East 9. East 9 completely takes place within one city. Everything you do is in one city. Sometimes you step out here and there to do a couple of things or quests, but like for the most part, you are getting really intimate with that one city. Yakuza does this pretty often too, where you're usually in one location. Sometimes you go into another city here and there, but like usually you're in that one place. So Pokemon taking a stab at it is very interesting to me. And more than that, I'm very interested how they're continuing the Pokemon Legends series. I guess Arceus did very good. Arceus was a game that I was interested in, but I never really got it because I'm just not a fan how Nintendo games are like always very expensive. Like if Arceus ever dropped to like $30 or something, I would probably get it, but like I'm not paying $80 for it personally. So I'm assuming that the Arceus mechanics are going to be the mechanics that drive this game. So there's not going to be turn-based combat. You're going to be fighting Pokemon in real time and things like that. So I'm very interested to see where this game goes. Again, the trailer really doesn't show shit. It just shows the city kind of being built through a hologram. The Z to A look interesting, like the logo. I don't know if this is... I haven't seen any discussion about the game, but like it looks like kind of like that green legendary Pokemon. I think it was called like Zygarde or something like that. So I'm not sure if that's connected, but yeah, it's very cool, especially because they're bringing back an old city. So like I'm sure it'll be connected somehow with X and Y. But yeah, it's very cool. And one of the most exciting things I want to mention, I think a lot of people were talking about this, is that it's coming out next year. I think that's pretty important because I think a lot of people, when Pokemon Scarlet and Violet came out, did not like that it was very, very half-baked. Some would even call it quarter-baked, where like, I thought the game was fantastic, personally, in terms of what they were trying to do with the game. Execution, it was not the best. They clearly had some, I don't know, memory leak issues, because the more I would play the game, the more the frames would drop, and at a certain point, it would just crash. So clearly, optimization was just thrown out the window for this game, and like I get why people hate it. I'm kind of miffed that a lot of people just kind of write off the game completely, even though I think it is a good game and it is a right step, or they're going in the right direction for what Pokemon should be. And so I'm very happy to see them experimenting more with the different type of Pokemon, where Legends was very interesting. I didn't play it, but I played it a few hours. Like my cousin let me play it for a bit, and so I do think it's interesting that they're going back to Legends and expanding it more with another game, especially if they're gonna completely play it in one city. I want to see how expansive they can get with that city, and like how I can explore that, because Pokemon towns, I think, are like easily the weakest point of the games. Like when you think of like I think it was Sword and Shield, where they literally had a town where you walk into it, you can walk to the right for 7 seconds and you're at the end of the town. That was like the entire town. It was so fucking tiny, because they're unfortunately still using the town, let's say, blueprints of the old games where the towns were small, but it was fine for those games because you couldn't really see the entire town. It was 2D. But for 3D games, you really cannot get away with the small towns anymore. And they fixed it a bit more in Sword and Shield. Not Sword and Shield, sorry, Scarlet and Violet, where the towns are a lot bigger. I remember some of them being actually a lot bigger. And so if they can nail this game where they have one huge city, I can't wait to see what the future of Pokemon games could be, because I could see them doing that. Maybe if they finally get to the point where they're able to do a Pokemon game where they put time into it, like say a mainline Pokemon game, they take 4 years to make it. It'd be cool if they make a mainline Pokemon game which is straight up just 4 well-built cities and say like 4 gyms, and like that's the game. That'd be dope. So like we'll see how they go with this. I'm assuming this is like a 100% experiment on their side, but Pokemon Legends ZNA, I think I will be probably picking it up and seeing how it is, because I didn't get into Arceus, but this one looks interesting enough where obviously we'll have to see more of what the game is, but I'm keeping this at the back of my head. I'm probably gonna be picking this up, so let's see how this game does. But yeah, that pretty much covers everything from the JRPG news section. So we're gonna be going into the next segment, which is JRPGs that are releasing this week. Now, as always, the JRPGs that I will be talking about have been sourced from a website called icicledisaster.com. So if you wanna look at it yourself, feel free to visit the website, because that's easily the best website I can find that kind of lists future JRPG releases. Now, unlike last week, there's actually several games that are coming out or have come out this week. So I'm going to be talking about the games from February 25th to March 2nd. That's the week that I am recording. So let's start with a game that's coming out on February 27th, and this is a mobile game. Now, it's a mobile game. It's called X Asterisk, but it's very much not like a traditional mobile game as you would think. I watched a trailer on it, and I'm playing it right now for myself, so I can kind of see how it is. It very much looks like in terms of scope, like a Genshin Impact type game. Like, it looks like a full-ass JRPG. Like, if this game came out on the PS5, like, I would believe it. And yeah, it's very much like if you think about like any like anime-ish game like Scarlet Nexus or like Project Mugen I was talking about, it looks like a game of that type. But what's very interesting about this game that I kind of want to talk about is this is a mobile game, but it seems like they're taking more of a traditional approach with how they're releasing it. It's not like Genshin Impact where it's free and you can, buy cosmetics and characters and gacha stuff. It is a game for $10. You pay for it, and from the reviews I'm seeing, they don't have any gacha or microtransaction in it. But it's very interesting because $10 is very cheap. I would expect no gacha if the game was like $40 or something, but like it's $10 and like I'll be honest, if I'm ever bored in the near future where I don't have any games to play, I might pick this up because this looks like from the trailer it looks pretty cool. So yeah, that is a game that is coming out. Oh, it's come out. It came out on February 27th. So it came out yesterday from when I'm recording this. So if you guys want to pick it up, check it out. It's called X Asterisk. And I'm looking at it on the iOS store, but I believe it's also out on the Google Play Store. Let me confirm it right now. Yep, it is out on Android too. So yeah, X Asterisk, check that out if you want to. The next game that also came out yesterday, it came out on the Switch. It is called Shiren the Wanderer. Now, this is a JRPG. It is a 2D, no, it's a 3D JRPG, but it's kind of like top-down isometric. It looks like it is more of a tactical JRPG type game. It looks very much adjacent to Trails in the Sky, like graphics-wise, if you know that game. Personally, not a game that I'm going to be playing, especially because I usually don't play Switch exclusives that often, but it looks interesting enough. It looks kind of like a, B-tier JRPG where, like, I'm sure it'd be fun. It looks a lot like Boundless Nayata, actually. If you know that game, it came out kind of like last year, I believe. Trails Boundless Nayata. No, Boundless Nayata Trails. Nope. I think it's called The Legend of Heroes Nayata Boundless Trails. Something like that. Just Google Trails Nayata, you'll find it. And it looks very much like that, graphics-wise, and like scope-wise, it looks pretty similar too. So if you're interested in playing Shiren the Wanderer, that is out too on the Nintendo Switch. And it's $60 from what I'm seeing, so I'm not sure if it's... Oh, no, it's Amazon.com, never mind. I thought it might have been cheaper because $60 in Canadian would be a lot cheaper than what retail price is. So no, it's a full-price game, so yeah, if you're interested in that, go check it out. Another game, I think we all know what game I'm going to be talking about. It's coming out on February 29th. Everyone's hyped about it. Of course, I'm talking about Goblin Slayer Another Adventure Nightmare Feast that is coming out on Switch and PC. And it's connected. I've heard of the anime Goblin Slayer, so it's obviously connected to that. From the screenshots I'm looking at, the cutscenes look like classic visual novel style cutscenes where you just see the character and they're just talking. And gameplay wise, it looks like a grid-based tactical RPG. Akin to Fire Emblem, so that is another strategy-based game that's coming out this week. So a lot of strategy-based JRPGs coming out, and the characters are like pixel-based when you're fighting, so that looks pretty cool. But yeah, that is a game that is actually coming out today. Interestingly enough, I'm noticing on Steam it says English is not supported, but it's also coming out on Switch, where I don't think they would release a game on Switch that didn't have English, so I'm assuming English support will come on Steam at some point. But yeah, that is a game that is coming out on February 28th on Switch and PC. And lastly, the game that I was actually alluding to that's coming out on February 29th is obviously Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Not too much to add about this. Obviously a game I'm very hyped for, a game a lot of people have been hyped for. It's a fantastic game from the reviews. I just saw a picture on Twitter where they kind of posted, all the scores, and they were all like 10 out of 10 and 5 out of 5. So it's doing very good. I believe it's like 92 on Metacritic. And yeah, so it's doing very good. I'm happy to see that, and hopefully it will live up to what it is. Again, I'll be getting to it at some point. I do have it pre-ordered. It's coming tomorrow. I got the deluxe edition because I want to kind of check out that art book. But yeah, that is another game that's coming out on February 29th on the PlayStation 5. And yeah, that's all the JRPGs that are releasing or have released this week. And let's go on to the next segment, which is some kind of JRPG mechanic that I find very interesting. Okay, so the mechanic that I want to talk about, it's pretty like topical because of the games I'm playing, and I actually already kind of mentioned it earlier in this podcast, and I was trying my best not to go too deep into it so I can talk about it here. I don't know if this mechanic has a name. I just called it quick abilities in my notes here, but it's pretty much what I was talking about in Crisis Core, where you can hold L1 and then the face buttons become shortcuts to use certain spells or whatever material you have on. So for example, I'm playing Crisis Core right now, and if you hold L1, I can do X to cure myself, or I can do triangle to use thunder, square to blizzard, R1 to blizzard edge, and things like that. So like I have shortcuts for abilities that I can very easily do because when I hold L1, my face buttons become that. And I noticed that I really started liking this mechanic with Final Fantasy 16 because that was the first game where I really explicitly notice it. In Final Fantasy 16, all your moves are done with your face buttons, where I believe if you hold R2, your face buttons become different abilities you have, and depending on which icon's power you're using, they become different moves. And I very much love how Final Fantasy 16 did it, where I think Final Fantasy 16 did it the best in my opinion, where it's not attached to any MP bar, or in Final Fantasy Crisis Core, there's an MP bar and an AP bar. It's just purely, you just gotta wait for the move to load, MMO style, where you can use any moves, and by the time you're done using all of them, your old ones have pretty much already recharged. You can kind of get a rotation going. So I just like the system so much because I think it makes the game a lot more varied compared to other games where like you're just doing pure melee, which I think gets boring really quickly. But you're also not digging through menus a lot. And it's funny because I never thought about this before, but Kingdom Hearts is the same thing, and this is a game I played when I was a kid where like, yeah, it's exact same shortcut system where you hold, I think it was L1, and then you can like, you know, assign Firaga or like Kiraga or Flaga, whatever you want. So Kingdom Hearts technically does the same thing too, it's just that they aren't doing it in a modern style where like, I feel like every game that does it now has the exact same UI, which is like the 4 diamonds on the corner of the screen, and once you hold the trigger, it just kind of comes up. Also Spider-Man 2, I think, does the exact same thing now, where like, Spider-Man 1 wasn't like this, but Spider-Man 2 was the exact same thing. You hold a trigger and all your moves come up. So I think this is something that's becoming more common in games, and I think they're doing this just to make combat more intuitive, because a trend that I notice games doing that I personally like, but I can see a lot of people not liking, is a lot of games are coming out where like the controls for the combat are just always on the screen. So like somewhere on the corner of the screen, it might say like, oh, you can press X to attack, you can press square to dodge, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of like that because if I come to the game like 2 days later, I might forget how to play. And like, since it's right there, it's cool. And so more games moving to this dynamic combat system that's using the triggers, but also all the games are doing the same thing, I think is nice because, again, it's very intuitive. You just hold the trigger and you have your moves, and it doesn't really have to show anything on the screen. Like, you just kind of understand what it means just by looking at it. And so I think this quick ability or shortcut system is really intuitive and it works great. So yeah, not really much more to talk about it. I just noticed that in a lot of games I've been playing, like I mentioned, FF16, Crisis Core, it's in Final Fantasy 7 Remake 2 actually. I'm not really using it in 7 Remake because I'm just used to the menu system, but maybe that's something I'll try. But it's in 7 Remake, it's in 16, in Crisis Core, Kingdom Hearts games, Spider-Man 2, so it is something I am noticing more and more, and I bet it's in games I don't even know. But I just want to shout out the mechanic for being something that makes the games more enjoyable personally, because it's very easy to pick up when you're playing multiple games, and it keeps things refreshing and not very still like some games can get that just have like one type of combat. So yeah, good job, quick abilities. And we are going to be ending this podcast with the last segment, which is my JRPG casual top list. And like always, this list is completely casual. Like, I just thought about them off the top of my head and made the list, and I'm going to be saying the list right away. But first, let me introduce the topic. The list I'm going to be giving you is the top Final Fantasy games that I have completed. So in terms of what games I have played, I just want to talk about that really quickly. So the Final Fantasy games that I have played but not completed are Final Fantasy 14. That's something I'm kind of still playing and I play every once in a while. Final Fantasy 9, I played a decent amount of that a long time ago, like on the PS4, but I never really ended up finishing it. And if you want to count this, World of Final Fantasy is something I got on the Switch a long time ago, played it for a while, but it kind of dropped off of. Now, for the Final Fantasy games that I have completed, the first is Final Fantasy 7 Crisis Core was the first Final Fantasy game I played on the PSP, so that is one that I've completed. Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I completed that when it came out, and I'm playing through that again. Final Fantasy 15 is one of the more modern ones that I played and completed. Final Fantasy 4, obviously, recently I played for the first time and completed, and Final Fantasy 16 is one that I completed too. And so I have 5 Final Fantasy games that I've completed, so I'm going to be ranking those 5 games on this list, and obviously hopefully it's clear that I'm putting each of these in my top 5 because those are the only 5 I've played Obviously, if I played all the Final Fantasy games, some of these wouldn't even be on the list, I assume, but because those are the only 5 I played, I'm going to be ranking those 5. So let me just straight up give you my top 5 list, and I'll just talk about any specifics if I want to. So number 5 on my list is Final Fantasy 15. Number 4 on my list, funnily enough, is Final Fantasy 4. Number 3 is Final Fantasy Crisis Core. Number 2 is Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and number 1 is Final Fantasy 16. Now, very quickly, Final Fantasy 15 is number 5. I just from these, like, that's probably the only Final Fantasy game that, like, I'm not even sure I can say I like it was fine when I played it, but I didn't enjoy it too much. The combat, I think, was not great. I like the open world concept of it. I remember enjoying that, but there wasn't too much to do in the world. The combat of where, like, you can just hold the button and Noctis fights himself, I wasn't a huge fan of. I don't really remember anything worthwhile about the plot. I remember there being a thing where, like, to get the full plot, you had to, like, watch a movie, and they had a lot of side content that you had to kind of get into, which I wasn't really a fan of. So Final Fantasy 15, which I'm sure is a fine game, it just wasn't really one that I was really into, so that's why it's kind of last on the list. Number 4 is Final Fantasy 4. I very much enjoyed the game. I personally don't think it lives up to more of the modern games, in my opinion, because I'm more of a person who's into more modern style games, so there is that. Like, I didn't like the grinding aspect of it, for example, but I thought the story was really good. I thought the characters were likable. I couldn't get too deep into the characters, like I mentioned, because it is an old style game. They really didn't have too many character arcs, but overall, I did enjoy the game, and that's why it comes to number 4. Now, number 3 is interesting because it's Final Fantasy Crisis Core. The reason I'm saying it's interesting is because I am purely basing this off of the vibes I remember of me playing the game. I remember when I was on the PSP, I love the game. I remember playing it a couple of times and I really enjoyed it. I just have really good memories of this game. It was one of the... It was honestly probably one of the first JRPGs I played other than Kingdom Hearts when I was a kid. And so, like, I just remember it being really fun. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I am replaying the series through Crisis Core Reunion now, so I'm kind of getting more of the finer details of the plot, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So we'll see if this list ever changes once I'm done with the game. But yeah, Crisis Core I'm really enjoying. Number 2 is 7 Remake. Again, this is purely off vibes because I played this 4 years ago. I don't really remember the plot too much, but I remember more about this game than Crisis Core. I remember certain plot points which are cool. I remember certain boss fights that I really ended up enjoying. I just don't remember the plot too much, which is why I think this isn't number 1. And number 1 is Final Fantasy 16, like I mentioned. This is the game, like I mentioned many times, which made me into a Final Fantasy fan, where beforehand I was playing Final Fantasy 14, I was playing these other Final Fantasy games, but when I played 16, I had, like, explicit feelings of being like, okay, I think I kind of get Final Fantasy now. I think I can really get into the series, and I kind of want to start playing more of the series, which is the only reason I played Final Fantasy 4, which is the reason why I'm so excited for Rebirth, because Final Fantasy 16 was just such a great game to me. I think the plot was fantastic. I really love the characters, which I didn't expect, because usually when there's kind of like a stoic character, I usually don't end up, you know, kind of falling in love with that type of vibe. But I really like Clive. I like the characters around him. I really liked the home base system, the combat, everything about Final Fantasy 16 I was a fan of. The bosses, I think, are just world class in terms of gaming. I don't know if this is true, but I feel like I've heard people say, like, in the way they made the bosses, they literally had teams work only on the bosses for, like, years at a time. That's how complex the bosses are, and I believe it. Like, if you did the Titan boss fight, you know how insane the boss fight is. And so I just think they went, like, above and beyond with the game, and I thought the ending was pretty interesting too. And so, like, I think Final Fantasy 16 was just great for me, and to me is easily the number 1 game, and I'm not sure if another Final Fantasy game will be able to top it, because it just fit my vibe so clearly. But yeah, that's my casual top Final Fantasy list. So number 5 was Final Fantasy 15, number 4 was Final Fantasy 4, number 3 was Crisis Core, number 2 was 7 Remake, and number 1 was Final Fantasy 16. And if you have any thoughts about my list, or even better, if you have a favorite Final Fantasy game, please let me know down in the comments below. I appreciate it. I read all the comments, and if you want to discuss anything with me, I'd be down to do so. So if you have any opinions on Final Fantasy, let me know down in the comments below. Even 16, like, it's my favorite game, but I've heard online that a lot of people didn't like it. I don't know why, but if you have reasons, let me know down below. I'm down to talk about it. But yeah, that was my list, and now we will be ending off episode 4 of Spill the Tearal. Thank you guys for watching or listening if you're listening on audio services. I am still in the process of getting this on different audio services, but right now, if you are interested in audio, you can listen to it on Spotify, you can listen to it on Anchor, or if you want to do it manually, I do have an RSS feed in the description, and you can just paste that in your podcast app and it'll work fine. So yeah, there's really not much more to talk about. Hopefully I will see you next week for episode 5, but I'll see you guys later. Peace.